Metroid Prime 4 has finally come out, and it's been out for about a week, so today I'm going to be giving my full spoiler-free review of the game. My name is James, and if you like this video, please subscribe to my channel. I'm trying to hit 500 subscribers by the end of this year. So the way this video is going to look, I'm going to start by going through my background with Metroid Prime. Then I'm going to get into my surface level thoughts and how I played the game. Then I'll get into the positives, followed by the things that I'm a little bit mixed on, and the things that are noticeably different from other Metroid Prime games. And then I'll wrap everything up with the negatives. So let's get started with my background. I played Metroid Prime 1, 2, and 3 when they each came out on the GameCube and the Wii, and I've replayed all of them a fair bit. Metroid Prime 1 is the game that I've played the most. I've probably replayed it 4 or 5 times since Metroid Prime Remastered came out in 2023. Metroid Prime 2 is the one that I've played the next most. That one I've replayed every 4 or 5 years since it came out. And finally, Metroid Prime 3 is the one that I've played the least. I've actually only played that one twice. I played it first when it came out in 2007, and then I did replay it on YouTube between 2024 and 2025. So I'd like to think that I know Metroid Prime pretty well, and I hope that helps you understand where I'm coming from as I make this review. Moving into my general thoughts of the game, overall, I really enjoyed it. I played entirely on Nintendo Switch 2. I played 30 hours over about 4 days, and in that time, I found 100% of the items and 100% of the logbook entries. Which, fun fact, this was my first time getting 100% of the logbook entries in a Metroid Prime. I did end up having to look up the location of one scout bot, and we'll talk a little bit more about scout bots later. And I looked up probably about 3 or 4 logbook entries, but that was about it. When I did finally finish the game, my end screen completion time said it was 17 hours, which means that it's clearly not counting time that I spent on the map or reading logbook descriptions or anything like that. And I think that I could probably get that 17 hours down to probably 10 or 12 hours if I were to play it again, knowing exactly what to do and the right order to do stuff in, and then also if I were to not go for 100% items. Let's keep going on a high note with the positives. Some things that I think the game does really well and that I would like to see them keep doing in future Metroid Prime games. I think that the mood and the atmosphere and the tone of the game are very, very good. To me, they feel in line with the other Metroid Prime games. You do spend quite a bit of time with other characters, but large portions of that time you are not spending with other characters. Of the 30 hours that I played, probably like 4 hours total was spent with other characters. And that's really what I want from a Metroid game. Kind of solo exploration and figuring stuff out on your own. And I don't remember any points in the game where I was with another character and they told me how to get through a puzzle or anything like that. Some of the music in the game kind of stood out to me. Specifically in Fury Green, I think it had a really good soundtrack to it, and it was a really good first area. And then the silence in Soul Valley, I thought added to the game, added to kind of the like desolate and like hopeless nature of the game as well. And the rest of the areas, none of the music really stuck out to me. There was definitely nothing in the game that hit the heights of the like Magmore Caverns theme from Metroid Prime 1, but I would say that Fury Green, the music from Fury Green felt right at home with your like Talon Overworld theme and some of those other areas. The next thing that I like is that they've brought back like multiple weapons and like switching between weapons. This is something that they had in Metroid Prime 1 and 2, where you could switch between like your wave beam, ice beam, plasma beam, and power beam, or in Metroid Prime 2, your like light beam, dark beam, and your power beam. In Metroid Prime 3, when you got a new gun, it replaced your previous gun, so you didn't have a way to like go back to it. This is fixed in Metroid Prime 4. At the beginning of the game, you do get the you get the psychic crystal, which changes the way that your power beam shoots a little bit. But after that, from that moment forward, any weapon that you collect the entire game will stay with you until the end of the game, which I like. Another thing that I like is that they brought back the optional upgrades, similar to like the flamethrower or the sonic boom in Metroid Prime 1 and 2. Metroid Prime 3 did not have optional upgrades. Like it had like expansions and stuff, but those weren't like completely new weapons that you could beat the game without. One of the weapons that you get in the opening like 2 hours of Metroid Prime 4 is the fire shot. And so it was really exciting to me to be exploring somewhere in the game and find an upgrade that makes an upgrade that is not required that makes your fire shot a little bit more powerful. Things like that make you feel like your exploration is paying off, and it encourages you to continue revisiting areas and going and looking through every door and every crevice and every morph ball hole and anything that you can find you want to go and explore. Next, I want to talk about the way the game looks visually. Visually, I found this game to be very impressive. I wasn't even playing on a good TV. I was playing on a 1080p Insignia TV that's probably over 10 years old, and I was still very, very impressed with this game visually. And then as far as performance goes, this game runs at a very smooth 60 frames per second. I don't have a 120 hertz TV anywhere in my house, so I didn't check out the 120 hertz mode, but I've heard that that is really good as well. I think this is the best performing game probably on Switch 1 and on Switch 2. And I know that games like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom did get a 60 frame per second, did get a 60 FPS upgrade on Switch 2, but those games are not quite as like quick and as rich as Metroid is. So I think that that improvement is a little bit more, I'm able to appreciate it a little bit more in Metroid Prime 4. And then finally, I talked about this a little bit earlier. I really liked that I was able to get like 99% of the items without looking anything up. And part of the reason I was able to do that was because of the way I played the game. When I did get to an item that I wasn't able to get to yet, I wrote down where it was. So then when I did get the appropriate item, I knew everywhere that I needed to go back to. And then additionally, the scout bots helped quite a bit as well. And I think I'll talk more about those a little bit later. That's all the positives I got. Now it's time to move into the mixed and the different section. So I'm going to get started with the differences, and this is just a list of stuff that I'm not really feeling good or bad about, but that I've noticed is different from other Metroid Prime games. And these are in the order that I noticed them when I was playing mostly, and then a couple at the end are ones that I just kind of threw on there. Save stations, refill, ammo. In previous Metroid Prime games, you had to either get to the ship or find a missile station. So or find like an ammo station in order to get all of your ammo replenished. So that's just a little quality of life thing. Next thing that I noticed was that your missile pickups that you get from like defeating enemies and opening boxes and stuff, they replenish 5 missiles again. Originally in Metroid Prime 1, 2, and 3, they did replenish 5 missiles, but then in Metroid Prime Remastered from 2023, they only replenished 3 missiles. So I did notice that once again, they replenish 5 missiles. When you die in like an important story section or fighting a boss, you have an option to load a checkpoint instead of just instead of just continuing from your last save. And I do think this is I do think that this is an option in Metroid Prime 3. But I know that this is not an option in Metroid Prime 1 or Metroid Prime 2, and I honestly don't remember if it's an option in Metroid Prime Remastered, because I typically don't die when I'm replaying it. All of your secondary weapons have ammo. This is something that they introduced first in Metroid Prime 2. You had your light beam ammo and your dark beam ammo, and that was something that people complained about quite a bit. They got rid of that in Metroid Prime 3. And now, so you have 3 additional weapons. And instead of having a different ammo type for each one, they all just have one ammo type that they share called shot. And I mentioned earlier the fire shot. So obviously your fire shot uses some of your shot ammo. And personally, I thought that they were very generous with the shot expansions that I could fight so many enemies with the fire shot and never have to worry about running out of ammo. So that was nice. You can upgrade your power beam attack in this game, or your psychic beam. So in Metroid Prime 1, you get more powerful by finding new weapons and then using those weapons on existing enemies to defeat them easier. In Metroid Prime 2, you kind of get more powerful by using your light and dark beam and getting like a type advantage against certain enemies. And then in Metroid Prime 3, when you find a new weapon, it replaces your current weapon. So you kind of get stronger in that way. In Metroid Prime 4, you can collect these green crystals and turn them in at this altar. And all this is in the opening hour of the game. You can collect these green crystals and turn them in at this altar, and it actually makes your basic power beam shot, your psychic beam, whatever, your psychic beam hit a little bit harder and go a little bit faster. So it's nice that you're able to make your basic weapon a little bit stronger in this game. And I'm going to talk more about those green crystals later. The next thing that I noticed was that your psychic visor and your scan visor share kind of like one interface. Whereas before, your combat visor and your scan visor and your like thermal visor, dark visor, x-ray visor, echo visor were all like different things that you would select. Now your only options are combat visor or scan/psychic visor. And I think that interface actually is a little bit better. I think it helps kind of streamline some of that stuff a little bit so that you're not kind of like fumbling through your different visors like in the middle of a fight or anything. Next thing I want to talk about is the scout bots. The scout bots are basically these the downed scout bots are in the world. You can go and find them, and if you bring them back to life and scan them, they will show you the location of any item that you haven't collected yet in an area. I like this, and I think that this is done pretty well. You can't really activate any of the scout bots until pretty late into the game, so it's not going to ruin the early game, like atmosphere and exploration. And personally, I like that you're able to really get most of the items without looking anything up. And this actually isn't the first time that they've done something like this. They did have something similar in Metroid Prime 3, where I believe you had to go to like some research facility and like hit some buttons and stuff and then scan this thing, and then like all of the collectibles in the entire game would be revealed. So pretty similar there. There are more expansions and types of expansions in this game than any other Metroid Prime game. In Metroid Prime 4, there's around 115 expansions that you're going to be collecting versus the 65 to 75 that are in each of the other 3 games. Another thing that I noticed is that it will often tell you what you need for a lock or for a door before you actually have the required upgrade, which is different from other games, specifically in Metroid Prime 1. If you get to a purple door before you have the wave beam, it doesn't tell you how you can open it. It just kind of tells you that you can't open it yet. One thing that's in this game that I don't remember being in any other Metroid Prime games is that there's a point in this game where I think you are supposed to lose a battle. There's this one specific battle that's pretty early in the game where I felt like it was going pretty poorly, and I got down to 1 hit point, and then a cutscene plays, and the battle is over. And I'm not a huge fan of, giving you battles that you're not supposed to win in games as a whole. In the context of Metroid Prime, I didn't really like it because for the rest of the game, every single time that I felt like a battle was going really poorly, in the back of my mind, I was thinking, what if this is an unwinnable battle and I'm supposed to lose? And so I didn't really like second-guessing the rest of the game. And then finally, another difference that I found was that this is the only one of the Metroid Prime games where it shows your logbook percentage on the end screen when you beat the game, which kind of makes me think that they want you to go and get the 100% logbook, but I'll talk a little bit more about the logbook later. Now I'm going to get into the items that I think are a little bit more mixed and less so just different from previous games. The first one is that there are 26 required upgrades for this game, which is way more, which is about 40% more than the other Metroid Prime games. But a lot of them feel like filler and reskinned upgrades from previous games. So of those 26 upgrades, 2 of them are just straight up repeats, which I think is fine. I think that part of the fun of exploring in Metroid games is recollecting some familiar items, so I'm okay with that. But then 17 of those 26 upgrades are what I would consider revamped upgrades or a half-step upgrade. So a revamp upgrade would be an upgrade that you've seen before in another game, but this time it functions a tiny bit differently, or it's infused with, or it's a psychic version of the same upgrade. This is a similar issue that I had with Metroid Prime 3, where I said that the items didn't really feel very rewarding because it felt like the same item, even though they called it something different. So that issue is still here. That means that 7 of those 26 upgrades are new upgrades, except 3 of those 7 are just suits. And then another 2 of those upgrades have actually very, very scripted and limited use cases, which really only leaves you with 2 of 26 upgrades that are actually new game mechanics or new ideas, and both of those 2 upgrades are given to you in the opening hour of the game. And as far as the psychic abilities go, I don't have an issue with there being psychic abilities in a Metroid game, but I don't like feeling like such a high percentage of your upgrades are just psychic versions of abilities that you've gotten before. Another thing as far as upgrades go is I would have liked to have seen more suits or more diverse suits, especially considering that the Viola suit that you spend 90% of the game in looks like Baymax from Big Hero 6. So I'm not really too hot on the upgrades in this game, but they didn't ruin the game or anything like that. The next thing that I do want to talk about is the logbook, and while I was playing through the game, the logbook felt really small. I couldn't really tell by looking around online if this logbook is actually smaller than the ones in the other games, or if it's just presented in a way that makes it feel a little bit smaller. You'll have your logbook and then it'll have like a subsection, but the subsection might only have like might only have like 2 or 3 entries in it, which seems kind of low. Another thing that I'm not crazy about, another thing that I don't like about the logbook is that it's unclear when you're scanning a specific item whether or not it's actually being added to the logbook. I know that in Metroid Prime 1, it would tell you in the scan, like that a new, like, creatures or research or pirate data entry has been created in your logbook. And honestly, it made, like, scanning different items feel a little bit, like, less rewarding than I would have liked. And then it also made it to where at the end of the game, when I was trying to clean up some of the logbook scans and stuff, that I would go into the world and I would scan something and I wouldn't be sure if it created a logbook entry. So then I would have to go to the pause menu, switch over to the logbook, and go and look to see if it filled up one of the empty slots that was in there. So it made that a little bit clunky for me as well. Next thing that I want to talk about is the map structure. And if you're unfamiliar, the way the Metroid Prime 4 is structured is that you have this large open hub world that is called Soul Valley, and at the corners of Soul Valley you have access points into different areas. And my biggest issue here is not really with Soul Valley as a whole, because I do feel like they did a pretty good job of putting, like, interesting stuff in Soul Valley for you to, like, find and discover. It's more so that in the different areas, so the first area you go to is Fury Green, that there's really only one way in and one way out of Fury Green. When you get in, you kind of just follow the path all the way to the end, and then you kind of just have to walk, like, all the way back to get out. The exploration in that way doesn't really feel as good, but what does still kind of feel good is that when you are in Fury Green or in Soul Valley or in one of these other areas, you do still find stuff that you aren't able to interface with yet. So you are still kind of encouraged to go back to areas that you've already been to, but not to the level of, like, Metroid Prime 1 or Metroid Prime 2. Another thing that kind of makes the areas feel pretty disconnected to me is that, as I mentioned, like, there is only one way in and one way out of these different areas. And I think they could have made it, like, a lot better by, like, even in, like, the late game, having some, like, shortcuts that maybe something will take you from, like, this part of Fury from, like, give you a really quick way to go directly from Fury Green to a different area, instead of making it to where if you're in Fury Green and then you do want to go to a different area, you have to go through Soul Valley. And that, I feel like, was kind of a misstep as far as the map structure and stuff. Another thing that I noticed is that they are very generous with area maps. In previous Metroid Prime games, it seemed like an area map was, like, often, like, a reward for, like, scanning a terminal or, like, doing extra exploration. I know that in Metroid Prime 1, there's different, like, map stations that you can find if you go off the beaten path and stuff. In this game, it feels like every time you get into an area for the first time, they're gonna right away give you a map. And to me, that kind of took away from the exploration a little bit and kind of not knowing, like, where you're going. And I think it makes the experience feel a little bit more guided. Next, I do want to talk about Viola, the motorcycle. And as a whole, I really don't have an issue with Viola. There are some sections where your speed gets, like, limited while you're in Viola, and those are probably my biggest issues. because so your normal cruising speed is around 700. And then if you're boosting in Soul Valley, you can probably get up to about 1,000. In these areas where it wants to like limit your speed, usually if you're like indoors or something, it takes you all the way down to like 250 or 300. And so I feel like it limits you like a little bit too much. So I found those to be kind of annoying. The next thing that I want to talk about is the dialogue. And I didn't really have an issue with characters talking to Samus or really dialogue in the game as a whole. In Metroid Prime 3, there was a fair amount of dialogue, and characters would talk to Samus, but then they would just kind of keep talking as if Samus had responded and we just like can't hear it. In this game, characters talk to Samus and they'll be like, "Oh, Samus, where are you going? What are you trying to do?" And then she'll like pull up her map and like point to a room on it. And they'll be like, "Oh, that's where you're trying to go?" As if like Samus actually in universe can't talk and that they're like playing charades or something. And that was weirder to me than any of the characters actually like talking to Samus. The next thing that I want to talk about is the bosses. And I thought that there were probably like 2 or 3 standout bosses in the game, but for the most part, the bosses in the game didn't feel as fun to fight as in some of the other games. I thought the first boss that you fight in Fury Green after the introduction was really cool. And then later there was a boss in Soul Valley that I thought was really cool, but the rest of them kind of fell flat for me. I think I'll talk about why they fell flat a little bit later. That's all that I have for mixed. Now I'm going to talk about the negatives. I mentioned earlier the energy crystals that you can use for upgrades. One negative for me is that it made it sound in the beginning of the game like those energy crystal upgrades were optional. And so I had kind of been ignoring them for the entire game. And then pretty late in the game, like all of our bags are packed to go fight the final boss, we find out that those energy crystal upgrades are not optional. They're actually required, and it required me to do a whole lot of like driving around and grinding for energy crystals, which was boring. The next thing is that I do kind of feel like the game holds your hand a little bit too much between the constant radio interruptions that kind of break the atmosphere for me, and then also what I talked about earlier with the area maps, how as soon as you get to an area, they're showing you a map and kind of telling you exactly where to go, and then you pretty much just go straight there with no interruptions, and then straight back. A lot of the game felt like they were holding your hand, and it felt very guided to me. And that does kind of bring me to my next point, which is that the opening, 3 hours or so of the game feel very, very scripted. There's hardly any reward for exploring or really anything you can explore because you're on such narrow pathways. You don't have any areas that you can go back to when you get new abilities. That you get 3 or 4 required items in a row with no room to play around and experiment with them. The next thing that I do want to talk about is the enemy balancing. This was also one of my issues in Metroid Prime 3, but in a different way. In this game, it feels like your basic enemies, have a lot of health and are going to be doing a lot of damage to you. And I think that they know this was an issue because the game starts out with you getting 2 energy tanks right off the bat. And then at the end of the game, when you're cleaning up your collectibles and stuff, what your shot expansion, instead of it stopping at 500, which would be a very normal number for it to stop at, it goes up to 530. And so my theory here is that the opening section of the game was too tough in their tests. So they pulled 2 energy tanks from later in the game and replaced them with shot expansions so that you start the game with more health, and then in turn end up getting 530 shot instead of just 500. I don't have any way to prove that, but that's my theory. Negative for me is probably Silux, who is presented as the main villain. And I wanted to have seen more. I felt, without really getting into any story stuff, I felt like he was very hands-off during the game. He was in the beginning of the game for like 10 seconds, and then he disappears for like most of the game. And I think that's a problem. Kind of related to that, I don't think the story here is really anything to write home about. It's pretty similar to other Metroid stories where Samus ends up in an unfamiliar area and discovers something that says that she is the chosen one and is the only one capable of fulfilling some kind of destiny. And I think that this story is overdone, and I would have liked to see them go in a different direction with it. Hopefully in Metroid Prime 5, they can fix that a little bit. And then finally, my biggest number one issue with the game is probably in the controls. And let me start by saying I like that they still have the lock-on system from Metroid Prime 1 and 2, and also in 3. But often, particularly in boss battles, the spot that you end up locking onto is not actually what you need to shoot. I mentioned that I would talk more about bosses later on. This is it. I found that to be very annoying. And it makes those boss battles more about aiming and shooting as opposed to like movement, which I feel like is mostly what Metroid Prime has always been about. I also wish that there was an option in the game to use the classic tank controls from Metroid Prime 1, or at least like better remap settings so that you can kind of build your own tank controls, because there's nothing really like that here. And I kind of expected it to be here because they included the tank controls in Metroid Prime 1 Remastered, and then they're just not here. Guys, that's all that I have to say about Metroid Prime 4. In the comment section, please let me know what you think of the game and what you want to see specifically from Metroid Prime in the future. Thanks, guys.